Welcome to podcast number 21. This is Sage Man, CEO of TAPAS and Stuff Productions, which isn't a real company yet, so I'm not a real CEO yet, but I can't help it. I'm ambitious. Time for another week of summarizing the musical I wrote, reading through my favorite childhood book series, and watching Disney films to rip off their concepts for a role-playing game universe. There will be no Team Salmon segment this week, as nothing really happened this week. I'll just say the plan is still the same. Casey finishes the character designs, Christine finishes the music, then we start making an animatic. So, yep, still waiting on all that. Sorry, that's what I always sound like early in the morning. In Act 2, Scene 7 of Drizzt and the Companions of the Dance Hall, our 7 main characters stealthily make their way through the guild hall, where they are accosted by Bodhi and 3 of her vampire minions. Bodhi, having experience fighting Drizzt, teleports him somewhere else, so she won't have to deal with him, and Entrari goes off looking for him, leaving Jarlaxle and the other 4 companions to fight Bodhi and the vampires. The battle is mostly set to a musical number called I Kill You, which I actually wrote many years ago, but I thought would fit the character of Bodhi nicely. Bodhi sings it. Goes like this, at least the first verse. Shish kebab and barbecue, that's what I'm about to do to you. So make it easy for yourselves, your guts will go in jars on my shelves. Hack and slash and slice and dice, the smell of blood is very nice. I'll massacre you girls and all and mount your flippin' heads on my wall. There's a couple more verses like that, just the most comically violent stuff I could cook up back when I was like 12, maybe? Anyway, after the song ends, it's Jarlaxle and Wolfgar working together, who are the ones to take Bodhi down, killing her. Jarlaxle pursues the other vampires, and the 4 remaining companions set off to search for Drizzt. Today in the Droon segment, we're reading Book 19, The Coiled Viper, illustrated by Tim Jessel. The cover itself provides a nice wham moment, finding the Coiled Viper in the upper world, Kia wearing a t-shirt and jeans. I haven't checked the publication year on a Droon book in some time. I meant to keep track of that. I could never remember to. Okay, but we're in 2003 now. This book published in July of 2003. Cool. Chapter 1, A Matter of Time. Eric, Julie, and Neil meet up at the library where they're doing a school history report on family trees and ancestors and stuff. Neil's mom is the head librarian, and, okay, this is kind of stupid, but at this point they find a whole bunch of illustrations and photographs of spar at historical events, like the landing of the Mayflower and a video clip of the Wright brothers. That's a pretty funky coincidence that they'd find all those depictions at once within a few minutes of each other. Anyway, the point is, Spar's been successfully leaping forward through time. Chapter 2, Glimph? As they talk about Spar, a large frog-like creature sitting on the windowsill recognizes the name and takes off. They pursue the creature, only for it to disappear into a portal in an alleyway. They swiftly head to Droon, where they come upon Galen, Kia, and Max being attacked by a shipload of Nins. Chapter 3, Battle on the Beach. The Droon trio revealed that the Nins are trying to stop them from hiding the Eye of the Viper in a safe place. Galen explains that the Coiled Viper is the most unimaginably powerful of the 3 powers, and could only be rivaled by the Moon Medallion, a creation of Queen Zara that Uruk had on him when he followed Spar into the time portal. The Nins catch up to them and steal the eye back, setting sail for Kano, the Volcano Palace. Galen and Max go to pursue the Nins and send Kia and the Upperworld trio back to the Upperworld to keep Spar from finding the Viper. They bring Kia up to Eric's attic to see if she remembers anything about when Demether brought her up here to hide the Viper. She recalls a circle of trees, but that's as far as she gets before red lightning strikes the city, and Eric knows that Spar has finally made his way back to the present. Chapter 4, Play it again, Neil. There's a cringy moment where they try to pass Kia off as a normal girl to Eric's parents and kind of freak out a little. They smuggle Kia to Julie's house to get her changed into some normal clothes, and go to the alley to look for clues as to where the frog guy disappeared to. They find the flute he played to open the portal, and Neil remembers the tune and figures out how to play it, opening a portal to another world. Chapter 5, Beyond the Veil. They pass through the portal and find themselves in a portable city made of tents. The sky above is gray and stormy, and the air is cold. A gate identifies the city as Calabaz. Down the streets of Calabaz march large blue elephant-like creatures with shovel-shaped noses, being ridden by the frog-like creatures they saw before. The frogs spot Eric and pursue him, and he hides in one of the baskets on the sides of the shovel-nosed beasts. Chapter 6, City of Tents. Eric runs into the creature he saw earlier, who identifies himself as a Hooba named Piku, and explains that Lord Spar visited Calabaz generations ago and told all the Hoobas to capture Eric. Calabaz is in a world of darkness, parallel to Eric's world, and must change position every day until they are allowed to settle in the world of light. The Hoobas and their shovel-nosed beasts are digging a pit for Spar, which he claims will lead them to the world of light. Eric watches the digging and realizes they've dug all the way to Kano, all the way to Droon. An army of Nins ascends into Calabaz. Piku, upset that Spar has betrayed his people, rallies the Hoobas and sends Eric to reunite with his friends and find Spar's tent. Chapter 7, A Face from Far Away. Eric reunites with his friends and finds Spar's tent. There, they see that Spar has been very battered and aged by his journey through time, and he communicates with Demether, who refuses to tell him where the Viper is. Spar also has possession of the Moon Medallion, which Demether tells him has power over the Sons of Zara. A Nin reports to Spar that Galen and Max managed to steal the eye back from them. Spar spots the heroes hiding from him, so they flee, and Neil plays the flute to get them back into the world of light. Chapter 8, Hidden and Waiting. Back in their hometown, Kia again thinks back to a circle of trees and a fountain, which Julie recognizes as what used to be where the children's library is now. Julie shapeshifts into Neil's mom to get them past the crowds, and they dig behind the library, coming upon the Coiled Viper, which is a golden crown in the shape of, well, a coiled viper. Spar, meanwhile, is marching his army down Main Street to the terror of the onlooking Upperworlders. Chapter 9, The Moon Medallion. Spar tries to take the Viper from Eric and Kia, but Galen and Max show up to help. Galen holds off Spar as the others make their way back to Eric's house, pursued by Nins. The Hoobas and their beasts appear to fight the Nins off. But when the sky flashes red, Eric gets a bad feeling that Spar will use the Moon Medallion against Galen and runs back. Spar attempts to use the medallion to finish Galen off, but Eric makes the decision not to let Galen die now and hands the Viper over to Spar. Chapter 10, Sunrise. Spar and the Nins stampede into Eric's house to take the Rainbow Stairs back to Droon. Eric dares Spar to wear the Coiled Viper, as it is a crown, but Spar says it's not for him. When asked who it's for, Spar looks frightened for a moment, but returns to Droon. Galen puts a spell over the town that will make them forget everything that happened. Unfortunately, the mess that Spar and the Nins left behind can only be cleaned up by good old-fashioned hard work. Neil plays the flute that opens the portal, only to find that Calabaz has moved on. Neil keeps the flute as a souvenir and prepares himself for the next adventure in Droon. So this is a fun book, emotional and action-y too. I like that it mostly takes place in the upper world, and we finally see the Viper. Calabaz is introduced, which Neil, for whatever reason, feels a very strong connection to Calabaz, and there's the first innocuous mention of Eric's great-great-great-grandfather, the lore of Droon. It's heavy. Adaptation, 2 guest stars this episode. The first is Mrs. Kroger, Neil's mom, who, to keep the running gag going, I'd cast Ivana Lynch. Even if we totally failed at the running gag of all the trio having a parent played by a Harry Potter cast member, I'd still want Ivana Lynch in this role, because she just seems so fun and quirky and up for funny roles. The other is Piku. This is his only appearance in the series, but I'd want him to actually return when Calabaz does, which it does once, I think. For the voice of Piku, let's go with Wayne Brady. I'm a big fan of Wayne Brady, just one of the funniest and most talented guys anywhere ever, and so sweet and charming. The Hoobas would be puppets, of course, but I'm not doing that anymore. And in today's Keys and Kingdoms segment, we're doing Mary Poppins. I've definitely seen this movie. I remember where I was and who I was with, but I remember almost nothing of the movie or its songs. I know Disney's been exploiting people's nostalgia for this film recently. Earlier this decade, they released a controversial movie about the making of the movie, which I loved. And at the end of last year, they released a sequel, which will be the last film in my collection, which I'm looking forward to seeing, if for no other reason than Lin-Manuel, y'all. So, I'm surprisingly unaware of what I'm getting into. First thing I'm noticing, the movie is 2 hours and 19 minutes long. 20,000 Leagues was also a pretty long movie, so it's surprising to see movies from the 50s and 60s that are that long. I always assumed that movies over 2 hours were a more modern thing. I guess that was naive of me. It's in widescreen-ish, not as widescreen as 20,000 Leagues, but not square either. And of course, we have the Sherman Brothers again, so I'm looking forward to some good numbers, some of which I've heard before, some of which I simply don't recall. We open on Mary Poppins herself, played by Julie Andrews, sitting on a cloud, fiddling with her handbag and umbrella, ready to start whatever the movie's about. Then we come upon Bert, played by Dick Van Dyke, with film history's most infamously terrible English accent, who I think is a chimney sweep, but when we come upon him, he's a one-man band performing for tips. It's a nice intro. Van Dyke has some very good physicality and charm to make up for the dreadful accent. He then shows the audience around Cherry Tree Lane, directing us to number 17, where our story will take place. In number 17, the nanny, Katie, is trying to quit her job due to the children having run out on her again. Mrs. Banks returns home from some sort of women's rights protest, singing a song about the cause, and the movie seems to depict her as flighty and loony for being a suffragette. A fuck you movie. Mr. Banks, played by David Tomlinson, returns home from work and sings a song about being home from work. Okay, like Babes in Toyland, this is clearly a legit musical with songs devoted to every freaking moment. Of course, these are Sherman Brothers songs, so I wouldn't have it any other way. In his song, he mentions it's the year 1910, so that's nice and helpful. Disney films aren't usually so precise about when and where they're set. The kids, Jane and Michael, are brought home, having gone out to fly a shoddy homemade kite. Mr. Banks puts out an ad for a new, firm, and strict nanny, in song form, and the kids turn out to have written their own ad, asking for a sweet and fun nanny. Mr. Banks rips up their ad and throws it in the fire. The next day, an assload of nannies show up to interview for the position, but a windstorm blows them all away, and they're replaced by a lone applicant, none other than Mary Poppins, y'all. We find that she magically found and responded to the children's ad, to Mr. Banks' confusion. Despite having responded to the fun ad instead of the strict one, and doing things like sliding up banisters, Mary Poppins is actually quite firm, strict, and unsmiling. Her iconic carpet bag holds objects far too large to fit inside it. Who says a bag of holding has to look like an ordinary cloth sack, eh? Jane and Michael suspect Mary of being a witch, but thus far she seems more like an ordinary person with magic items, like a bag of holding and an umbrella of flying. Mary makes a game out of cleaning up the children's room, bringing us the song, "Spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down." Mary smiles for the first time when singing a duet with a very impressive animatronic Robin. She also duets with her own reflection, and Jane and Michael, surprisingly, are also able to use magic to clean up the room, though Michael takes a while to get the hang of it. Mary takes the kids out, and we come upon Bert making chalk drawings on the pavement, and it seems he's already familiar with Mary, or rather Mary Poppins. She's always referred to by her full name. Based on Saving Mr. Banks, the author was quite adamant about that, though she's just called Mary in some song lyrics where it's harder to fit a full name in. They jump into Bert's chalk drawing into an animated world. I didn't expect that to happen so early in the film. Mary and Bert take some time to themselves, dancing around and singing and meeting the iconic penguin waiters. I remember reading somewhere that Dick Van Dyke could not dance before taking this role. Pretty amazing. He's a grand dancer in this film and continues to be so to this day. Then there's a magic merry-go-round scene, and this film was definitely prioritizing whimsy over plot. "There's a classic English fox hunt, what, jolly good." Bert takes the side of the fox and saves him. Then Mary wins a horse race, which makes her feel supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Then rain washes the chalk away, ending the animation sequence, and at this point I got bored and went to do other stuff, but then I came back to finish the film. Mary promises to stay until the wind changes, whatever that may mean, denies the trip to the animated world ever happened, and sings the kids a reverse psychological lullaby called Stay Awake that puts them right to sleep. Andrew the dog comes to fetch Mary Poppins to the home of one Uncle Albert, played by Ed Wynn, who is laughing uncontrollably, causing him to float by the ceiling. He sings the song I Love to Laugh, and Wynn sings the whole thing, so I'm not sure why he only half sings his numbers in his previous Disney roles. And this is the only part of the movie I really remember from childhood, apart from supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. It's Uncle Albert singing. Don't even remember that Mary and Bert sing the song too, or that Bert, Mary, and the kids join Albert up on the ceiling for a tea party, or that they have to think of something sad in order to descend. Mr. Banks is starting to get annoyed at Mary, not liking the whimsy she's introducing to the Banks household. So Mary tricks him into thinking it's a good idea to take the kids to work with him. She then sings to the children about something they can see in London, a woman who charges tuppence for a bag of bird food to feed the pigeons that flock around her. She sings the song called Feed the Birds, which is apparently the song that convinced author P.L. Travers that maybe the movie wouldn't suck. Next day, they see the bird woman across the street from the bank, and Michael wants to feed them, but Mr. Banks instead wants them to go open up a savings account. He introduces them to the bank's board of directors, led by Mr. Dawes and Mr. Dawes, the father and son who run the place. Mr. Dawes Sr. is a doddering old man played by Dick Van Dyke in heavy makeup, and I understand Van Dyke plays Mr. Dawes Jr. in the sequel, which is clever. Mr. Banks and Mr. Dawes Sr. sing a song to the kids about bank account interest, which fails to impress them. They just want to feed the birds. And they make a big scene in the bank in front of everyone and run away into the streets of London, where they meet Bert, who is finally sweeping chimneys. Bert tells them that it must be hard for Mr. Banks to be trapped in such a soulless job, and sings his signature song, Chim Chimney, Chim Chimney, Chim Chim Chiree. Mrs. Banks is going to another rally, and it's Mary's day off, so Mrs. Banks makes Bert babysit. Michael, Jane, Bert, and a newly arrived Mary Poppins all get sucked up the chimney and walk around on the rooftops of London. Mary constructs a staircase of black smoke for them to go to the highest point in London. That was a great visual. Then there's a big song and dance number with a whole bunch of chimney sweeps that at one point had me thinking, oh my god, it's still going. And the number eventually goes into the Banks home, getting everything all sooty, and Mr. Banks arrives to see everything all in chaos. He then gets a call from Mr. Dawes and Mr. Dawes, who want to see him that night. He sings a little duet with Bert, where Bert makes him see that spending the day with his children probably shouldn't, in principle, have seemed like a stupid idea. Mr. Banks goes into the bank. I get it. Looks to the stairs where the bird woman usually sits to find she's not there, and goes into the boardroom where Mr. Dawes and Mr. Dawes fire him for being responsible for the scene earlier that day. There's an odd ceremonial thing where Mr. Dawes Jr. walks up to Mr. Banks and rips his corsage in half, turns his umbrella inside out, and punches a hole in his hat. This causes Mr. Banks to break down and start spouting all the jokes, phrases, and songs that the kids have picked up from their time with Mary Poppins. The next morning, the wind changes, and Poppins prepares to depart. Mr. Banks apparently never came home last night, so Mrs. Banks has the police looking for him, but it turns out he was in the cellar repairing the children's kite. So he sings the finale, "Let's go fly a kite." And the fact that "go fly a kite" is a euphemism for "go fuck yourself" is alluded to, with the police constable having a little misunderstanding with the inspector over the phone. That was a good moment. I wondered if they'd acknowledge that. Bert is now a kite salesman. Mr. Dawes Sr. turns out to have died laughing at Mr. Banks' jokes, so Mr. Dawes Jr. offers Mr. Banks a promotion. That's kind of morbid. Mary has a conversation with her umbrella. I expected that to happen earlier. I'm given to understand perhaps the umbrella talked more in the books. Pleased that she improved things amongst the Banks family and flies off. And then it ends. So that was charming. Long, didn't have much of a plot, but very cute and whimsical and Sherman Brothers-y. Mary Poppins is a very mysterious character who I hope I can fit into Keys and Kingdom's lore in her own unique way. That's it for me this week, folks. Short podcast this week. But yeah, that's all I got this week. Good nighty.